What's your name?
11.
Take a look at this graph, and this one too. They all show a similar trend, a steep decline in serial killers.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
I'm asking you the questions, my friend.
Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
The question is, if the data is right, where have the serial killers gone? And more importantly, what, if anything, has replaced them?
When I first started on the police department, we would have about 2,500 murders a year. A couple of years ago, we were down to 300. I was a plainclothesman, and we were in a unit called anti-crime, and the idea was to catch people in the act of the crimes. And you had all sorts of different people committing. They all had different methods, and that's, I think you can look at that at any criminal, including the serial killer.
In biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs. I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton of it. And I just started branching out dogs, cats.
Understanding why the Jeffrey Dahmers of this generation are nowhere to be seen is in some ways as complex as understanding exactly why people are driven to such unthinkable extremes. But there are solid theories.
I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take.
If there's a high-profile court case or an unsolved mystery, prominent networks, newspapers, and other publications turn to Katherine Ramsland for answers.
Forensic psychologist Katherine Ramsland was in contact with Dennis for 11 years.
Rather than some serial killer just blathering on about himself, and we have enough of those accounts, I wanted it to be more structured in terms of any real insight I could get, both from the case and from him. And he was actually pretty good about doing that. Also, he had an intact family, all-American kid. He had, grew up on farms, had both sets of grandparents alive. So what's with that? How is that? That's unusual. So we do actually learn something from him, and that we shouldn't close down our formulas too fast in terms of thinking that we know everything about serial killers, because we will shut out some like him who come to it with something that's unexpected.
In other words, the stereotype fueled by the media could mean that other less likely candidates are slipping through the net. Another factor could lie in the realms of science and the fact we have a better understanding of the genetics behind violence and therefore increased chance of intervention. Take the so-called serial killer gene, otherwise known as the MAOA gene. Researchers found that people with defects or mutations in the gene are more likely to be aggressive.
They seem to see it in a lot of people, but a lot of people aren't serial killers. So, like I said, when you take a planet of 6 billion people, and even if only 5% of it had it, you're talking hundreds of millions of people. Fortunately, I'm pretty sure that we don't have that many serial killers. They may not have progressed to that level, but they could be low-level shoplifters. Something that gives them the same kicks, but without going to that extreme.
Whilst a link has been drawn by experts, it wouldn't be enough to create the kind of reduction we can see here. But what about the spike? Could that have the answers?
I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret, very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it.
Historian Peter Vronsky came up with a remarkable theory as to why the spike happened. He worked out that the average age of a serial killer at their first kill was 28. He tracked back and discovered that the majority were either children during World War II or just after, and that the surge was somehow a trauma of war, which could explain the subsequent decline.
Here are men who tremble, men who cannot sleep, men with pains that are nonetheless real because they are of mental origin, men who cannot remember, paralyzed men whose paralysis is dictated by the mind.
When you look across the eras, you begin to see the manifestations of serial murder take on some of the social and cultural aspects, but it's still difficult to compare across historical eras.
Putting these ideas aside, even the most plausible theories explaining the decline in serial killings, like our better understanding of mental health, aren't without challenges.
The different times that I have caused people's deaths or caused them discomfort through the influence, I believe it was the influence of that voice or whatever it was. It wasn't a voice in my head, it was a voice in here. And when I would do it afterwards, I would hear like a laughter in my chest.
Every year, we get called to emotionally disturbed persons, EDP. And we go there and somebody in the family's called on this person. A lot of them have been brought to hospitals by the police several times. And they just get released because the system has nowhere to house them. And they get just released and then they do the same thing. And eventually somebody gets hurt.
A man is arrested in Florida who eventually confesses to 23 murders. Nearly all the victims were young and pretty.
But whilst mental health services are often underfunded, other areas of detection are much more advanced.
We have what we call mobilization plans specifically to deal with murders. We're able to flood it with police and shut down areas and then check all the cars. We have after a homicide's committed, they drive around the neighborhood with license plate readers and they take all the plates of all the cars.
In response to the rise of serial murder in the 1960s and 70s, the FBI developed this unit for looking at these stranger homicides. And as a result, profiling came into prominence as a tool in the arsenal of forensic investigation, specifically for serial murder.
She said she was beaten almost daily with flashlights, firewood, and his fist.
Yeah, you can still get away with murder, but it is harder. And I think the sophistication is rising. But access to these resources certainly isn't available everywhere.
Besides the theories, there is a potential plot twist in all of this. There might not actually be less serial killers out there, just confusion about what a serial killer actually is.
One of the things that has really muddled serial murder is that for a couple of decades, we looked at at least three incidents with a psychological cooling off period to talk about what serial murder was. And then that changed in 2005 to 2 with no other psychological apparatus around it. So how do you compare our stats from the 1980s and 90s, in the 70s, to after 2005? You can't, because you just changed the definition. That shift in 2005 makes all the difference in what we're counting and how we're thinking about this phenomenon. So it's become more difficult. I wish the FBI hadn't done that. I understand why they did do it, but I think they did a wrong move.
I tell you, Dad, I'm really sorry that this has happened, and I love you a lot.
I love you too.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
We haven't always shown it a lot, but I do love him a great deal. I love you. And without the support of my folks, I don't think I would have come through this.
We like the simple approach because it makes us feel safe. Like if we get the formula right, then we'll know, we'll have some kind of control over the data, which means that it'll give us some kind of predictive control over these killers. And we just don't have it. I know we like to feel safe, we're not that safe.
Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
What have you been arrested for?